Welcome back. We go now to Mr. Hamza Ali in London from Bloomberg. He is a senior tax reporter with the Bloomberg Corporation, and we talk with him. Good morning.
Good morning, Bo, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining me this morning and for talking about a very important topic. I don't think people in the Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago have really engaged the issue deeply. So it's a good opportunity for us to explore it, both in terms of the global situation as well as what it means for developing countries. And I hope that you'll be able to help me with this. So I will start by asking, how did the conversation about this 15% minimum tax evolve? And how come so many countries, 136 of them, have actually signed on to this minimum tax?
Okay, I guess to understand the process, we're going to have to go back a little bit. Essentially, like 100 years ago, when the rules were sort of invented, the rules that govern international taxation of multinational companies currently state that a company can only be taxed if they have a physical presence in a country, something like a building or an employee. And there's a simple reason for this. It's that back when the rules were made 100 years ago, things like online marketplaces and digital streaming didn't exist, which meant that if you wanted to sell something in a country, you had to have a physical presence in that country. Now, the problem that this creates is that the world that we currently have doesn't work this way. And it means that multinational companies, and in particular tech groups, are able to have a huge economic footprint in a country without ever incurring tax liabilities that their local competitors undergo. Several countries that grew frustrated with this process launched unilateral digital taxes. And the US, which is sort of home to some of the largest multinationals that were targeted by these taxes, grew alarmed that one of their most vibrant sectors were being targeted. And it threatened these countries with a retaliatory trade war if they continue targeting their businesses. So to solve this sort of brouhaha, the sort of countries came together, and over 140 countries, I think, came together to negotiate a solution. And what they came up with was a two-part plan, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. And this is what you were referring to earlier when you said that 130 plus countries have signed up to this agreement. Pillar 1 grants countries where the largest, most profitable multinationals make sales a new right to tax these companies. And Pillar 2 is what you were referring to as the minimum tax, is a set of rules that effectively makes it difficult for multinationals to arbitrage low tax jurisdictions against high tax jurisdictions.
Okay, so I mean, the thinking is how to contain these corporations at a time when business has evolved and technology allows them international and global reach, and geographical presence is neither here nor there in terms of their existence. But tell me something, what are the objections of those few countries that did not sign? 4 countries did not sign: Sri Lanka, Pakistan, a couple of others. What is the objection?
Okay, so some of the countries have spoken out about why it is they didn't sign up. And I guess to understand the reasoning behind their decision, you have to sort of understand what the carrot for the countries that did sign up is. And the carrot is that under the sort of traditional taxation system, they didn't have the rights, or they could only tax a fraction of the profits of the very largest businesses. And most tax revenue globally from multinationals comes from a handful of companies that are larger and more profitable than the rest. And now countries across the world, all countries essentially, can get a chance to tax a little bit of of these sort of profits. So that's the carrot. And then the stick on the other side of it is that minimum tax rules don't require a global agreement for them to happen. The US, for example, already has a minimum tax rule, which means that multinationals were going to face these types of rules anyway, and they weren't going to be coordinated. So there's the combination of those two things sort of makes it that this thing was already coming, and there's a carrot for you to sign up now. But all of that sort of taken into account, some of the countries, for example, Nigeria, has sort of stated that the amount of money it would have taken for them to administer these brand new rules, it would cost them more money to do it than they would gain from actually collecting.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know
that's right.
Nigeria
Yeah.
objected strongly. I saw an interview with someone in an agency in Nigeria that does research on taxation, and basically they were objecting to the taxes. Now, this tax agreement still has to be passed into law in individual countries. I mean, it's a global agreement, but you have to pass the law in individual countries to make it real. How will this work? And secondly, how long will it take to actually be established?
So this is something that we've been reporting a lot about recently, because the nature of this sort of agreement is that it's brand new, which means that for a lot of it, you're going to have domestic law changes. To just sort of take that as the EU as an example, so already the OECD was supposed to have published model rules, which are essentially a draft version of the law that's going to implement the minimum tax rules. And then that draft law has to be taken and put into a directive. And then that directive has to be transposed into domestic laws of the individual member states. Now, that entire process, which normally takes about 3 or 4 years to sort of get all the way through, is gonna have to be done in about 6 months, which is incredibly ambitious, and it sort of reflects the issue that I sort of mentioned earlier, which is that if countries don't solve this problem quickly, it could spiral into a trade war, which is what they're desperate to try and avoid.
Yes.
But the implementation target is to have it all done and dusted by the end of 2023. And that's globally. That's not just the EU, that's everywhere. And that means that there has to be a domestic process for ratifying and passing the different elements of this agreement. And with Pillar 1, that's even more complicated, because they're creating a multilateral convention, which is sort of the first of its kind, that's going to dramatically it's going to require a legal process to negotiate it, and it's going to have to be ratified domestically, and all of that has to be done by the end of next year. So I think they've got maybe 13 months to do the whole of this, and then they need countries to sign up to it. And if they don't get the big countries to sign up to it quickly, it could be a problem.
Yeah, it seems incredibly ambitious, and knowing how legislatures operate and how countries respond to public opinion of constituents in order to make legislation, and of course the divisions between political parties. Even thinking about the United States, you can have serious problems there with the Democrats and the Republicans in actually getting the legislation passed through Congress and the Senate. So it's a problem. But let's move on and ask, Now, what size of companies are we talking about, and what countries are really affected by this? And given that extractive industries have been left out of this process, and also financial services, it looks like the target is really specific companies that have, I would say, powerful markets and presence in certain countries, not all countries of the world. Could you explore that for me a little bit?
Okay, so to try and I'll tackle sort of the carve-outs first. The carve-outs are specifically sort of targeting extractives and financial services as a little bit of a hangover of a previous sort of iteration of these rules. Essentially, financial services and extractives were carved out because they are regulated, and it's very difficult for these two industries in particular to have a presence in a country without them having a physical presence.
Physical presence.
So,
okay, so that is
the problem that the rules are sort of designed to solve, these guys aren't the culprits. Is the thinking behind them. So to your point about are they targeting a sort of a specific group of businesses or anything like that? No, they're just targeting multinationals that can take advantage of their sort of size and scale and their sort of intangible assets. So intangible assets are things that aren't physical. It's things like your patents, your ideas that you can license to other people and then use to reduce your tax bill. These kind of things are what are being targeted by the rules, and extractives and financial services essentially can't take advantage of them. So and we're talking about regulated financial services here, not just all financial services. And it's because if you're a regulated financial service, you have to have a physical presence in the country that you're regulated in order to operate in it. And it means that it's very difficult for you to create a non-taxable presence elsewhere. And like sort of, and keep your licenses, I should say. But all that being said, the industries they chose to carve out is a political decision made by countries, and they could have extracted others as well that they didn't choose to extract. And now, who exactly is targeted is any multinational. So for Pillar 1, it's any multinational that has revenues above 20 billion and a profit margin of above 10%. And that's theoretically going to reduce the number of companies affected to about 100 companies. And it's going to be, the very biggest, most profitable companies that you're talking about. Some tech groups, some pharmaceutical groups, some conglomerates. So it spans a lot of industries. It's not going to target, say, just tech. And then beyond that, on Pillar 2, Pillar 2 is going to affect any company globally that has above 750 million euros of revenue. And it is also, there are some carve-outs like international shipping, but that's about it. And companies that are new to, that have a small international footprint. So if you're a growth company, those are essentially the ones who are carved out.
Okay. Does what is taking place now, and as it evolves and becomes law in various countries, you think it's likely to affect taxation policy for other things related to international business? Or, in other words, do you think by taking this initiative, there is likely to be a ripple effect in certain areas of taxation?
Yes. So one of the big arguments that is happening right now in the negotiations is that companies are pushing for the number of covered taxes to expand. So what does that mean? It means that if they say just corporation taxes covered by the rules, then that means that you aren't going to get the benefits of sort of certainty for things like withholding taxes or similar taxes that are related but aren't the same as corporation tax. So it means that you have this international system for corporation tax, but then you have all these other local taxes that feed into your decision making that are related. So, for example, if you sell shares in the UK, you would pay stamp duty, land tax on the shares, as well as corporation tax. So when you have those situations where there's multiple taxes linked to a decision, should they be treated together is something that sort of corporations are pushing for at the moment. And if that isn't the case, if the rules say no, this is just corporation tax, then there's going to be a situation where you're going to have a knock-on effect from these international rules directly on those taxes. Now, that's a direct effect that we're talking about, but there's also indirect effects, which is things like if countries can't compete on sort of the rate of tax that they're going to provide to corporations, then you can get a situation where they'll compete on other things like income tax or inheritance tax or capital gains tax. They could change and compete using different taxes to try and attract businesses, still using their tax regime, but just not focusing on corporation tax. So there's a possibility for it to have all kinds of knock-on effects. And beyond sort of taxation, they could also have a spillover on regulation, which is another way that they could sort of attract businesses to sort of gain a foothold. But this is something that people complain about, but there appears to be no evidence of the case. And just to sort of say as well, I guess the debate about the race to the bottom and is one that doesn't really sometimes take into consideration the historical fact that a lot of countries that have low or no tax have always been that way, that they haven't changed and they haven't sort of raced sort of levels of corporate tax to the bottom. And while OECD countries have been reducing their corporate tax rates over a space of time, it's not a race to the bottom to sort of say that there's, Caribbean nation, most Caribbean nations that have low tax rates haven't cut their tax rates to get to get to a low tax rate. They just have never had corporation tax, for example. And in that situation, it's not a race to the bottom so much as a multinational taking advantage of the fact that there was no corporate tax in the Caribbean nation.
All right. Is autonomy of individual countries to determine tax policy, is this undermined by what is happening globally, or are we likely to see, which is what I think you're suggesting in what you're saying, some tension and some innovations by individual countries to generate revenue in spite of this lower tax rate? And if a country now has a tax rate that is less than 15%, will they raise the taxes, because in any case they would be taxed by their home country to make it 15%. What is likely to happen there? And after this, we're going to take a little break, and I'm going to come back.
I guess it's up to this sort of individual country how they respond. But the sort of logic is that it would make sense for them to increase their tax rate, because whilst they're saying, you're going to be charged 12%, for example, somebody's going to benefit from the extra 3% to get it to 15%, and it might as well be you. That's the sort of general logic behind why you should raise your rates. But you don't have to raise your rates. And to sort of tackle the first part of your question, there is from Pillar 2, the minimum tax rule, there is a substance-based carve-out, and the substance-based carve-out says that for real substantive economic activity, countries can grant a tax exemption that reduces you below the minimum rate. And that substance-based carve-out is for payroll and for tangible assets. And tangible assets are like buildings, machinery, factories, that kind of stuff are considered tangible assets. And payroll is, money you pay to employees. So essentially, governments can grant tax exemptions that incentivize, jobs and incentivize the building of, real tangible assets, roads, things like that. Anyway, that is to say that they're going to grant a 5% exemption as opposed to what they can currently grant, which is 100%. So it is yes, they're giving up some sovereignty, but not all of their sovereignty, to be able to use their tax system to incentivize the type of economic activities that they want.
So in a fundamental way, this particular agreement and the legislation that it will trigger creates a negotiated relations between a country's sovereignty and autonomy and the global rules that have been established and agreed to and signed upon. Okay, I want to ask you a question, but we won't answer it now. We're going to take a break, and this question is this. How is this likely to affect the investment strategy of multinationals, and what countries are likely to benefit the most? And then I want to take you into the challenge of industrialized versus developing countries. So thank you very much for staying with me. And all of you viewers, please stay as we continue this important conversation with Mr. Hamza Ali of the Bloomberg Group. And we will be right back after the commercials.
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutions.tt.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
As businesses adapt to the new normal, let Magic Mist take care of your cleaning and sanitization needs with our COVID-19 BSCAI internationally certified technicians. With over 43 years of protecting the health of our nation, you can trust us to ensure your building remains safe, healthy, and functional. Give us a call today at 638-6675 or 332-5522. Magic Mist Services Limited, your total facilities management solutions provider.
Feel the joy and love this time of year with MCTV and U975 FM by donating non-perishable items, personal care for all ages and gender, baby items and toys clearly labeled with age and gender. Drop-off zones are located at RCN Office, Guayamere Link Road, Charlieville. 5 buildings after Holiday Foods, northbound. Super Quality Supermarket, 3 locations, Macoya, Chaguanas, and Couva. Drop-offs have already begun and continue all the way to the 20th of December 2021. Make a difference this Christmas with MCTV and U975 FM.
Yes, welcome back. This is Brighter Morning with Bo, and I am Bo Tiwari, your host, and we are talking to Mr. Hamza Ali from the Bloomberg Group this morning. And we asked him a question, how is this likely to alter or affect the strategy of multinationals, and which countries are likely to benefit?
I guess time will tell exactly how it will work out. But we can sort of take the US guilty regime, so that the US minimum tax is referred to as guilty, and the effect that it's had. So a lot of multinationals that used Ireland as a base to sort of move assets from so this is non-US assets, US multinationals moved assets that they had across the rest of the world through Ireland into low tax jurisdictions like Bermuda. But after guilty came into effect, they could no longer sort of enjoy low or no tax rates, which meant that they were paying, at a minimum 13.125%. So the incentive was removed to send money to Bermuda. So they onshored all of their payments. So when the payments come into Ireland, these payments now go directly back to the US, because there's no point in keeping them in Bermuda, because you're not going to enjoy the 13%. So there was a lot of onshoring as a result. So that could be one effect of the rules if they work as designed. Another possible effect on sort of multinational planning is that they change where it is they have the most employees and tangible assets, to be a little bit more reflective of a structure that they want. So there could be some tax planning around that. Another sort of big effect could be, and this sort of depends on whether or not countries agree to this element, but this is a little bit technical, but the basis for calculating the global minimum tax is a company's accounts. So there could be some tax planning around what goes into a company's accounts and how and when it is they defer certain payments so that it doesn't appear in their accounts. But anyway, there's a number of things that they could do. But because we've yet to get full details on everything, we don't have an idea of what it is they can do. Is the short answer. Yeah. But beyond that part of the question, which countries will win? That's a tricky one, because I guess large countries are going to win. Large countries where the very largest, most profitable businesses make the most sales are gonna win the largest share of the taxing reallocation. And then on the minimum tax, it sort of depends on the current structure of the businesses in question and how quickly individual countries implement their own minimum tax rules. because there's a hierarchy. So normally the parent jurisdiction is the jurisdiction that will have the right to charge the minimum tax. But if there isn't a minimum tax rule of the parent jurisdiction, then the subsidiary jurisdictions can have their own minimum tax rules. So that was too technical an answer, but
it's important because
but it was a complex question.
Yeah, no, it seems fairly obvious that the big countries, the industrialized countries, are going to win based on these new rules. But the question for me, I mean, as someone living in the Caribbean, living in Trinidad and Tobago, is, does that mean that foreign investment in developing countries is now going to be at greater risk? Are we going to have a situation in which it makes more sense for big corporations to establish themselves and operate in big countries rather than move and make an investment in the developing countries, notwithstanding the fact that there might be benefits in the developing country in terms of wages and the conditions that attend their presence there and so on. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is a distinct possibility that this could remove a tool for developing countries to attract foreign direct investment through their taxation system. It's hard to say if this will dry up foreign direct investment, for sure, but taxation isn't the only tool. There are sort of other methods. For example, I mentioned earlier regulation. You just mentioned wages, but all of that sort of being sort of said, there are substance-based carve-outs. So I think a lot of countries have free trade zones, and as long as these are within the minimum tax or within the range of the minimum tax, then the substance-based carve-outs can be used to further attract businesses. But I think it would be a question for policymakers how they try and take advantage of these of this substance-based carve-out.
Yeah, you see, what I'm concerned about is that there are a range of complexities that emerge from this agreement, which I don't think have been thought through. And I don't understand how 136 countries, including all the developing countries except 4, can sign up to this without thinking through the consequences of this. I find this kind of amazing. To me, it's a kind of collective, I mean, I don't want to use the word stupidity, but I mean, a collective, it's a collective avoidance of thought and reality and intellectual rigor to sign so easily to this without thinking through the full implications of it. And this is what
I mean, it's sort of something I mentioned earlier about how the minimum tax rules don't require these developing countries to sign up. So, for example, if the UK launched a minimum tax rule and said they are going to charge 15% to all UK multinationals, so if that multinational had a minimum tax, if that multinational had a minimum had the minimum tax applied to it, that would mean that it could have its businesses in Bermuda that pay no tax, but then all the payments coming from that business to the UK would be charged at the 15% rate, making it impossible for it to enjoy the tax benefit. And that would require no input at all from Bermuda. So I think in that sense, their signing up to it didn't matter.
Yes, of course.
But at least when they sign up to this, theoretically, they get the benefit of Pillar One, which is some of the sort of profits of the largest multinationals are reallocated to them. Is how the theory goes.
All right, but let me ask you something. Look at what COVID has done in terms of revelations. I mean, it has shown the inequities of the world, the tremendous inequalities within countries and across the globe. It has shown immense vulnerabilities. It has created a condition in which, I mean, people are beginning to rethink what global capitalism should be. And it also has implications for the democratic process, because in some countries, authoritarianism has been asserted to a degree not anticipated. So, I mean, if what has been signed at COP26 holds, I mean, does it mean that we are ignoring all these lessons of COVID and what it has said to us about the structure of trade, investment, and development globally?
That's a really, I guess, big question. But like, no, I'm an optimistic person, and I think I would hope that it means that, you know, when there is a need, the countries can come together to come up with a solution that works for everybody, even if it isn't, you know, what individual countries would enjoy the most. And it's a compromise, this agreement. It's not great for everybody. The very largest countries lose, you know, the monopoly that they had on the taxing of these multinationals. Some of the smallest countries lose the ability to use their tax system to attract businesses. And you know, it's a compromise. Everybody loses a little bit, but the sum of the whole is better than its individual parts. Is sort of how it goes. But to sort of try and answer your question, I guess it's a good thing that countries in this environment can get together and agree something like this. And I think if they can, you know, continue to do it for things like climate change, you know, humanity wins.
All right. Well, on that optimistic note, Mr. Ali, Hamza Ali, I want to thank you so much for being with me this morning. Give my regards to your editor, Meg Shriv. And I don't know if you also know Nicola White in Washington, D.C.
I do, yes.
Say hello to her for me. And please take care. Thank you for being with us this morning. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. We've been talking to Mr. Hamza Ali of the Bloomberg Group. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Ali. And to all of you viewing on MCTV, this is Brighter Morning with Bo, and I am Bo Tiwari, creating the conditions now for the news. See you after the news.